What's up, Night Owl? Steely here, back with another video, and today we're going to be going over sidekicks in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I'm also going to go over the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide on how to tone down the CR of a monster so that it qualifies to be a sidekick. That way you can use monsters that wouldn't normally be available as your sidekicks. And I'm going to go over that after I go through what the book gives you. So to put it simply, a sidekick is just an NPC that follows your characters around, helps them out in combat, does sidekick things. You can have multiple sidekicks, one for each party member. The party can have one sidekick. It's really up to you, and it's also up to you who controls it. As per Tasha's, you can have a player control it, the group kind of decide what the NPC does, or you can control the sidekick. It's really free form. It's just an NPC that follows the party around and helps them out. The NPC, the sidekicks have 3 classes to choose from. These are very basic classes. These are not like the ones in the player's handbook. They have the expert, the warrior, and the spellcaster. The expert is more skill focused. The spellcaster obviously gets spells, and you get to choose which spell list they get. And I'll go over that in just a second. And then you have the warrior, which is you can choose either to be an attacker or a defender. Now, in order to qualify to be a sidekick, a monster must be a CR half or lower. There is a chart on page 306 of the Dungeon Master's Guide that has a list of monsters by challenge rating. You can see here the list of available sidekicks to choose from. Now, this list isn't definitive. There are more Involos and Mornicadens, but this will just be a basic guideline. And the ones that stand out to me are the Gnoll and the Myconid as sidekicks. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using the Gnoll as my example monster for a sidekick. I think Gnoll would be a solid sidekick. You can name it Hogger and give it some class levels. It can join the party. That could be a really fun one. The level of the sidekick will be determined by the average level of the party. If you're like me and you like to keep the party's level the same and they level up through milestones, that's easy. The sidekick will be the same level as the rest of the party, and they will have the amount of class levels that the party has. Now, as far as hit points, when our sidekick levels up, we're going to roll its hit die and add the Constitution modifier in order to determine how many hit points it has. Now, for our example, our Gnoll has a D8 hit die, so whenever it levels up, we're going to roll a D8. We're going to add its Constitution, and that's going to be its new hit points. I personally like using average, so instead of a D8, you could just do 5 plus Con and add that to its total, and you can also determine its hit points that way, but that's entirely up to you. The sidekick actually gets proficiency bonus and ability score improvements that are determined by the chart for whichever class you decide to choose. Now let's have a look at the first few levels of each class, starting with expert. In order to choose expert, a sidekick needs to have at least one language available to it. When it chooses expert at level 1, it's going to get bonus proficiencies. You get to choose 5 skills of your choice to add the proficiency bonus to, and you also get 2 tools. The sidekick will also get all simple weapons as long as it has a weapon proficiency in its stat block. At level 1, the expert also gets helpful, which allows it to use the help action as a bonus action. This is really good for a sidekick to just run in and use help on all the party members. That's awesome. As a bonus action, even. At second level, it gets cunning action, which will allow it to do even more with its bonus action. It can use dash, disengage, or hide as a bonus. At level 3, it gets expertise. You get to choose 2 skills and double your proficiency for them. The spellcaster class also requires that the creature have at least one language in its stat block. You get to choose 1 saving throw for the spellcaster to be proficient with, either charisma, wisdom, or intelligence. You get to choose 2 skills from the list that they give you that the sidekick will be proficient with. They also get light armor proficiency, and they get all simple weapons if they have a simple or martial weapon in their stat block. Now, on top of proficiencies, they also get spellcasting at level 1. And when they get spellcasting, they need to choose where to pull their spells from, which spell list. And there are 3 options. You can either choose mage, healer, or prodigy. If you choose mage, then you pull your spells from the wizard spell list. If you choose healer, you get cleric and druid, and if you choose prodigy, you get bard and warlock. Now, one quick note here, one kind of issue I had with this. Now, in my game, I gave the party a Myconid sidekick, and I wanted them to be sort of a healer, a naturey healer type. So I went with healer, and I noticed that nature isn't listed on the skills, which is really interesting because you can choose the druid spell list. You can choose druid spells, but you can't choose nature. So I went ahead and just added that in there, nature. That's up to you. I thought that was kind of odd. That stood out to me when I was building the sidekick for my party, that they didn't have access to nature, but that's up to you. That may have been an oversight. That may have been intentional. I'm not sure. They do have the other knowledges. They have arcana. They have religion. It was just something that was strange to me, that the fact that they could pull off the druid spell list, but not have access to the nature skill. Moving on. Also, when you get spellcasting, you're going to need to choose your spells known. At first level, the spellcaster is going to get 2 cantrips and 1 first level, or 1 spell known, and two first level spell slots. So the book actually gives you, based off whether you chose mage, healer, or prodigy, a recommended. And for healer, they said they recommend that you choose cure wounds, sacred flame, and guidance as your spells known. And again, you get 2 spell slots for 2 first level spell slots. And that's I guess that's just a quick way to build your sidekick if you want to just go off what the book recommends, or you can actually go through and pick some spells if you want to theme your sidekick more. That's totally up to you. The warrior class doesn't have any requirements. They can take this if they don't meet the requirement, like if they don't have that language for spellcasting and spellcaster and expert. If they don't have a language, then just go with warrior. And when they choose warrior, they're going to get those bonus proficiencies. Starting with the saving throw, they can choose 1 strength, dex, or con as their saving throw. They also get 2 skills from the list that they give you, which has nature on it. They also gain proficiency with all armor, and if they have a simple or martial weapon on their stat block, they get proficiency with all simple weapons, martial weapons, and shields. Also at level 1, the warrior will get to choose its role, whether it will be an attacker, at which point it will get +2 to all attack rolls, or it can be a defender, at which point it can use its reaction to give disadvantage to an attack that's targeting somebody other than the warrior. At second level, the warrior gets second wind that functions exactly like the fighter's second wind. At third level, the warrior gets improved critical, meaning that it crits on a 19 or a 20. That is awesome. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to go over how to tone down a monster so that it fits that CR 1/2 requirement to become a sidekick. For the example that we used, I went with Gnoll. You can just grab a Gnoll or grab the Myconid and use that as a sidekick. It's a CR 1/2. But what if you want to use a monster that isn't a CR 1/2? Let's go with Ghost. Let's say you want to have a Ghost as a sidekick. Unfortunately, Ghost is a CR 4. So how can we tone down the Ghost so that it meets that CR 1/2 or CR half requirement that we can use as a sidekick? And the reason I'm choosing Ghost is because it kind of fits. You can fit that anywhere. Ghost can be anywhere. It can take on any form. You can give it any race, anything, any kind of backstory. Ghost is just solid. Also, possession is pretty cool. It'd be pretty cool to have a sidekick with possession, but that's entirely up to you as a DM. I'm just using a Ghost as an example. We're going to take the Ghost, which is a CR 4, and we're going to tone it down to a CR half. And then we're going to make that Ghost our sidekick. You don't have to do this. You can just pick any monster. I'm simply going to go over the rules for toning it down based off of the Dungeon Master's Guide for altering monsters. On page 273 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, we have the rules for creating a monster. Now, our example was the Gnoll. So let's have a look at the Gnoll's stat block and compare it to the rules. That way we can kind of get a feel for how this works. Now, we know that a Gnoll is a CR half, so I want to see how we get there based off of the Dungeon Master's Guide. So to start with, let's look at defensive challenge rating. We're going to read down the hit points column of the monster statistics and then look across and note the challenge rating suggested for a monster of those hit points. Our Gnoll has 22 hit points, which puts it at the CR 8th. Now we look at the armor class suggested for a monster of that CR. And if the AC is at least 2 points higher or lower than the number, which was 8th, then we adjust it. Our Gnoll has an AC of 15 because they wear hide armor and a shield, which makes their AC 2 points higher, which bumps it up to a CR quarter, according to the chart. That's the defensive challenge rating. So our defensive challenge rating is a CR quarter for a Gnoll. Now let's look at its offensive challenge rating. So we want to read down the damage round column of the monster statistics by CR table until we find the monster's damage output. Now let's see if we can determine the monster's damage output. The Gnoll's bite does 4, the Gnoll's spear does 5 or 6, and the longbow does 5. So we're between 4 and 6 for its damage output. That puts us at around a CR quarter. Now we look at the attack bonus suggested for a monster of that CR. For the Gnoll, it's got a +4 to hit with its spear and its bite. So it's 1 higher. And it says if it's at least 2 points higher, we make our adjustments. We don't need to adjust it. It's got a +3 and a +4 to its bite and spear and longbow. So it's right there where it needs to be. So no adjustments needed. Now, one quick thing, a Gnoll has Rampage. So we need to look at that on the chart. Rampage says increase the monster's effective per round damage by 2. Now we determined that a Gnoll has 4 to 6 damage. So now that bumps it up to 6 to 8, which puts us right in there at CR half. And just to recap, our Gnoll's defensive challenge rating is a CR 1/4. Our Gnoll's offensive challenge rating was a CR 1/2. Now we average those challenge ratings, and that will be our monster's final challenge rating. And I guess because it's a 1/4 defensive and 1/2 offensive, that just puts it at 1/2. So it meets our requirements for being a sidekick. Now let's look at a more challenging one, the Ghost. So looking at the Ghost, we have a CR 4, and we want to tone this creature down to where it's a CR half based off of the rules given in the DMG, but we still want to keep its ghostly thing. So looking at it right away, I definitely wanted to have Possession. And Possession is actually listed in the DMG as doubling the monster's effective hit points. So when we start looking at its defensive CR, we need to double its hit points when we determine its defensive CR. Now, the big thing that's making this Ghost such a high CR, according to the DMG, is those resistances and its Horrifying Visage. The book says that Horrifying Visage uses the Frightful Presence, which increases the monster's effective hit points. So while this Ghost is sitting at 45 hit points, its damage resistance and immunities are doubling its effective hit points. Possession is also doubling its effective hit points, and Horrifying Visage is adding 25%. This is making the Ghost hit points outrageously high, therefore making its defensive challenge rating high, thereby making its overall challenge rating high. So those are the things that we want to turn down a bit, and we're also going to turn down its damage, and then we're going to try and find that sweet spot to make this thing a CR half. So right away, we're looking at the Ghost armor class, which is 11. That means that wherever we are on this chart, we get to lower our defensive challenge rating because our AC is 2 points lower than pretty much anything on this chart. And remember, our target CR is half, which means our hit points need to be around between 50 and 70. But remember, in the paragraph for defensive challenge rating, it says that if our AC is 2 points lower than it's suggested, then we get to move down one line on the chart, which means our target hit points is actually 71 to 85. Because that AC is 13, we're going to actually drop down to a CR half if we have the hit points of a CR 1 because of that low AC. So with all that information in mind, let's see if we can get our defensive challenge rating down low enough to where our average challenge rating will meet our requirements. So right away, armor class is 11, we're good there. Hit points is 45, we have 10d8. We can drop the hit dice down a little bit, and we can scrap Horrifying Visage and keep Possession. Possession is cool, and we'll keep those resistances as well. Those kind of make sense. Those are iconic. So Possession, damage resistance, and we'll drop our hit die down to, let's say, 68. I want to keep it an even number because on page 276 of the DMG, it says the average hit point per die is actually 4.5 for the D8. So if we do 6, then our hit points will be 6 times 4.5, which would put us at 27 hit points. At 27 hit points, our Possession and our resistances are going to triple our effective hit points, making it 81. By removing Horrifying Visage and dropping our hit dice down to 68 from 10d8, that brings us right where we want to be in the CR chart for CR1 hit points total. Because our AC is 11, we get to drop down one line farther to CR half, and that's where we want to be. Fortunately, the book says that incorporeal movement and etherealness have no effect on the creature's CR, so we get to keep those for free. Now for the Ghost's offensive challenge rating, our damage output. This one's really easy. The Ghost just has Withering Touch, which does 17. That puts us at a CR2 on the chart. Our attack bonus is +5 to hit, though. That's 2 points higher, so that actually bumps us up to a CR3 on the offensive challenge rating. In order to bring that down, I'm going to have a look at this Ghost stat block. It looks like the charisma is 17 And the ghost gets to use its charisma on this withering touch. That's the only way that it could get that +5. That's obviously its charisma plus its proficiency. If we drop that charisma down to something more reasonable, like a +1, say a 13 charisma, that would make our charisma +1, our proficiency +2, giving us a +3 to hit with our withering touch. If we drop the damage down to 1d6 +3, that makes our damage output 6. And with a +3 to hit and 6 damage, we're right at our CR half target. Well, no, if we drop charisma, then her damage goes down as well. So let's make withering touch 2d6, and then that'll be 2d6 +1. That'll put us where we need to be on the damage, and there we go. Just like that, our ghost meets our requirements for being a sidekick for the party. Now the party can have a ghost, and keep in mind this ghost has possession. That's going to have a pretty interesting impact on battles. So if you DM the ghost sidekick, this ghostly sidekick, try not to just completely overrun your big bad evil guy with a possession. Because you drop that ghost charisma down to a 13, the DC for its possession is going to lower, but it's also going to go up when its proficiency goes up as it levels up. But this is entirely up to you. This was just an example on how to tone down a creature. Obviously, you don't have to use the ghost. To me, the ghost was just the most interesting because of that possession. I really wanted to have a sidekick with possession. With that, a party member or even an NPC, the ghost can take over an NPC and you get to have, whatever the party is fighting. That could be a lot of fun, but that can also be really tricky. So be careful with that. And again, by toning down the hit dice just a little bit, removing that horrifying visage, our ghost isn't as ugly. We're going to get rid of horrifying visage, tone down that hit dice just a bit. We met our goal for our defensive CR. And then we toned down the damage to 1d6 and the charisma down to a +1. And that put us right where we wanted to be for a half CR creature, meeting our requirements for a half. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know how YouTube works. Hit those buttons, leave a comment down below. Let me know what creature you want to tone down to be a sidekick in your game, or what creature you're using as a sidekick in your game. And if you want to be a part of this D&D community, make sure you join the Discord, link in the description. Come by, ask questions, let me know what you think. And as always, I'll see you at sundown.